Welcome to Leaders and Learners. My name is Tanya McKenzie, and you can find me at the intersection of public relations and leadership. Join us as we talk to organizational leaders, elected officials, experts, authors, artists, and personalities, sharing their stories, talking about how they got to where they are and how they continue to learn and lead the way. So without further ado, let's get into it. Greetings, good people. Welcome to another edition of Leaders and Learners, where we all know that the best leaders are lifetime learners. And today I have someone that's going to help us learn a little something new about maybe what's going on in Georgia, about being involved in local politics, and of course, what she does on a day-to-day basis to help people become better at what they are doing. And before I do that, I do want to remind you all, because we are in election season, please make sure you are registered to vote because it is important. There are some that might say, my vote does not count, but that is pure shenanigans here. And we want you to know that it is. Whatever your point of view is, whatever side you lie on, it is still important to have your vote counted. So please make sure that you are registered and you plan to vote. Know where your voting booth is. Know the issues. And if you have problems with that, stick around because we'll talk about some of those today. And if you have any requests, make sure you put them in the comments or email us and we will get answers to the questions that you might be having. So without further ado, I got me another podcast host today. And you know, I love me a good podcast, insightful, beautiful, intelligent woman to join me, Miss Janice Allen Jackson. How are you?
I am doing great, and I hope you are too.
Absolutely. And having you here, because we've had to reschedule a few times because women be busy, we be booked and busy and stuff happens, but we are here for you people today. I'm blessed to have you here. And I want you to tell your story that you're going to share and help the people get to know you a little better.
Sure. I am Janice Allen Jackson. As you indicate, I am in the great city of Augusta, Georgia, which is where I was born and raised. I graduated from high school, moved off, came back many, many years later. I won't count them up for you, but came back to take a leadership role in our local government. I did that for about 5 years. And since that time, I have been consulting and podcasting. In terms of our focus for today, when you ask, hey, tell me a story about you, there's a lot I could tell you about my career, places I've been, the things I've done. But I think I want to hone in on this whole business of being a woman who is the first woman to do something. I have had the opportunity to be the first assistant city manager female in Albany, Georgia, and later the first city manager. Later on, I was the first female administrator in the consolidated Augusta-Richmond County government. And each time you walk into a role where nobody's been before, it creates a particular set of circumstances and stressors that people have a hard time navigating. A few days ago, I was having lunch with a woman who started in Albany at the same time I did, and she was the first female firefighter. And we just started talking about our careers over the decades, and we hadn't seen each other since the late 90s. So we just started talking about things, and I was listening to her, and I started thinking to myself, well, this sounds like me. This sounds like things that I've been through. I mean, in a nutshell, many times we as women feel like we have been either overly sexualized, shot down, have good ideas shot down because people don't trust that because it came from a woman as opposed to coming from a man, feeling like you're being suppressed, minimized, various other terms to just make it feel like somebody's trying to hide you when you're a woman in a role, hide, discount, not look at you in the same way that they would look at a male leader in any type of organization. So I think even though our environments were the same, the results our environments were different, the results were the same. We left those experiences with those types of feelings. So, and we also both acknowledged that when we started, we were so young that we didn't realize the degree of the insults of some of the things that happened. We just kept pushing. I'm one of those people. It's like, how dare you tell me where to put myself, where I should be, because I feel like my place is wherever I place myself. But there's just so much there. And interestingly, it tied directly into a sermon that I had just listened to the week before. I don't know if you're familiar with Reverend Dr. Gina Stewart. She is pastor of the Christ Missionary Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. And she had preached a sermon, old sermons a few years ago, but the sermon was called Do It Anyway. And it talked about being a woman who might not have been invited to something. She was talking about the woman who came in with the perfume in the alabaster box, and she wanted to pour it on Jesus's head, and everybody in the room was criticizing her. Said, that's expensive perfume. You could have sold that and given the money to the poor. And she's like, well, wait a minute. These are people that Jesus has surrounded himself with, and they don't want him to be recognized or saluted or honored in this way. That's just absolutely nuts. But they just want to bring this woman down with everything that she was attempting to do, even though it was the right thing for that particular time. And the theme of the sermon was do it anyway, which is to say, even if you get that type of criticism, you just keep right on rolling.
Thank you for sharing that. I live under this umbrella that we have more in common than we do different. And I wanted you to talk about what resonated most with you. Like, what was that moment where you're like, we have a lot in common, when you were dealing and talking to this firefighter, this young lady firefighter? What was that thing that you were like, I feel you?
There were several things throughout the conversation, but I think the one in particular was when she was discussing the pandemic, right as the pandemic was hitting. Some people didn't take it seriously. She, as a union leader, approached her fire chief and said, hey, I know somebody at the CDC, they think this thing is very serious. We're going to need some protective equipment to make sure that we can still continue to do our job safely. And he just sort of blew it off. And she felt like she had been shot down. And she questioned herself about, hey, whether that was a man who made that suggestion would have gotten the same response. We also, talked about promotional opportunities, and, sometimes you may apply for a promotion on a job, you don't get it, and you look back and you wonder, well, what was the reason? Was there something I could have done differently? You look at the person who did get the promotion, and sometimes you'll look at them and you'll think, well, yeah, I could see that person getting the job over me. But other times you look at who got the job and you're just like, really? I must be missing something here. What is it that this person has to offer that I don't? And I didn't have that experience so much with a promotional opportunity as it was being in a workplace. And I would watch how certain people's suggestions would get weight. They would be taken seriously. And I would be sitting there thinking, that's like the worst advice ever. I mean, why do you think that's good advice? What is it? And this is about the boss in that particular instance. Why do you not have the ability to see through the fact that this is just a bad idea? Why are you even considering this? And then you start thinking through, okay, does it have to do with race? Does it have to do with gender? Does it have to do with the fact that this person maybe has been in the organization longer than I have? So you have all these reasons that it could be. Some of those reasons may be very legitimate. Others of them don't mean anything at all. And you just never know what it is, and as I know, being an organizational leader is tough because I've been there. I know that there are a lot of things that people have to consider as leaders make those decisions. But sometimes and I always want to give them the benefit of the doubt in making decisions that maybe there's something I don't know here. Maybe there's some background I don't have. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I cannot see that that would be a reasonable or best decision to make.
It's funny
But
because
you're questioning yourself.
no matter how many women have found themselves in leadership positions, no matter how many times Black people or people of color have found themselves in leadership positions, change and seeing different images in leadership is a culture switch for some people that they're still not ready to move into. For that to be a norm, not everybody is comfortable with that. And more than, I'm sad for them. I'm sad because that's saying you can't grow. Your mind is absolutely at capacity at this point. So you can't learn anything new. You can't experience any more greatness because you can't see someone different than what you're used to in a certain position. It just seems like we continue to travel that path. So, what is your advice, though, for people that are still struggling with change?
I think first you have to recognize where you are. And I say that sometimes people go, well, why should I have to tone myself down to make somebody else feel comfortable? Unfortunately, sometimes you kind of have to do that. Now, you don't do it to the extreme, but let me give you a couple of examples. One of the things that my friend who was a firefighter said was that, as soon as she got into her first job, there were women who were saying things like, there's a woman in the fire station. I hope she's not sleeping with my husband.
Swear.
Yeah, those sorts of things would come up. Likewise, for me, as assistant city manager during that time, we had a major flood. In fact, it was almost exactly 30 years ago. And I was the public information officer for the flood, which is to say that I was on local and national TV giving updates on what was happening and what the public needed to do to stay safe, and telling people which areas of the city would be evacuated next, those sorts of messages. And afterwards, I had a gentleman, probably, 40 something years old. He was still living with his mom. And he said, me and my mom were sitting on TV watching you. And, we're just not used to having a woman on television telling us what to do.
I'm sorry.
So you have to understand where they are in their mindsets. And in that instance, I just, maybe you're not used to it, but it was okay, wasn't it? It turned out okay for you, didn't it?
You didn't die. Okay.
You got updates and everything was okay, right? Yeah, it sure was. So you have to, it is invaluable to meet people where they are, but in meeting them where they are, you have to also pull them along to the next step. And you got to realize it probably is going to need to be gradual. They don't get from
Nah, forget that. Give them whiplash. Just yank them up. Just...
in some environments, I have thought back on my career, honestly, in some environments where maybe I could have done better in bringing people along slowly. Because I walked into another organization and they just didn't have a very professional culture. So there were a lot of things that I took for granted. It's like, certainly you understand why I want to professionalize this organization, but they didn't necessarily see that. I mean, they just had no concept of the vision to get where they needed to be. So sometimes whiplash works and sometimes it doesn't.
I like it. I enjoy it. I'm all about, I don't have a lot of patience. So that is something I hopefully will grow into as I get older. I don't know, maybe not. But girl, I ain't got a lot of patience and I ain't got a lot of time. And I feel like we waste some time sometimes slow walking people into the promised land. Like, ma'am, I don't have time for that. Bring your ass. We ain't got time. We gotta go.
It takes some time. But yeah, I mean, this particular group, I was just absolutely horrified at how little professionalism there had been. And they clearly they didn't value it.
a peer of mine asked me recently, and she said, "Do you think certain groups of people feel like they can be less professional because they have the privilege of what was the word? They have the privilege of, I can't even remember the word, but it's basically like who they are is enough. So even if they get it wrong, it's fine because of who they are. Like, do you think they think like that when we are always trying to be perfect, and still the most menial things can be amplified?" And when she said that, when she asked me that, I was like, absolutely. I truly believe that some people, even in situations where it should be incredibly professional, will still take a passive and casual, lack of effort path, when if it was someone else, it wouldn't look the same.
In this particular case, they had gotten away with it for so long, they just assumed that was the way it was supposed to be.
Right.
I mean, they simply did not know any better.
That is crazy. It's crazy. So tell us a little bit more about your podcast. I've listened, but I want you to tell the viewers a little bit
Sure.
more about your pod, and just let you know I am a huge advocate of local politics. As much as we rant and rave about
Uh-huh,
federal politics, people
uh-huh.
don't seem to understand that it happens at the local level. Tell them about your show.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for subscribing and following. I appreciate that. Yeah, I started this because a couple of reasons. One day I was talking to somebody on a local radio station here in Augusta, and she said, it would probably build your brand to have your own radio show. And I was sitting there thinking, build my brand, really? Radio? What in the world would I talk about? And then a few months after that, I was talking to a local minister. He's retired from his church now, but he was talking about how he used to grab the church van, bring along a woman from the church, and they would drive through public housing complexes and other lower income neighborhoods where he knew that people did not have their own transportation. And he would say, "Hey, we can take you to vote. Bring your kids with you. I've got somebody on the van that can watch your kids while you go inside the polling place." And they would look at him and say, "Well, yeah, I am registered." Sometimes they would say, "I'm not registered to vote." Sometimes they would say, "I am registered, but I haven't studied the issues. I don't know these candidates. I don't know what to do if I get there."
Mm.
And that was what turned the light bulb on for me, that I needed to focus on local government and state government issues in the Local Matters podcast of Georgia. So
Mm.
I was thinking about it for a while. Like I said, thought about it for a few months, and because it took me probably 4 months to come up with the concept. And I just decided that that was the way to go. Haven't had any regrets about doing that. So just for format, I can tell you that on election years, I have candidates for local offices come in, and sometimes state offices, depending upon how much time I have in the schedule. And when we're not talking to candidates for offices, we are talking about the issues that you need to understand in order to be an engaged citizen. Like our most recent episode was about affordable housing. We talked about federal funds, what comes in from the federal government. And one of the most revealing things that came out of that conversation was that the allocations have not increased. So over the last 5 years or more. So it used to be that they could go in, do a complete rehab on a house, or they could offer $40,000 in down payment assistance. But now they're offering less in assistance because the allocations haven't grown, and the cost of construction has increased tremendously. So I don't feel like our local organization is able to do as much with their community development block grant funds because the allocations aren't keeping pace with the cost of construction, the cost of housing, the cost of rehabs, etc. So at the end of the day, that means that our moderate income families and our seniors who are depending upon those allocations for, let's say, weatherization of their homes, so they need new windows for better energy efficiency, they need a new roof, those sorts of very basic things, um, they can't get them anymore because the allocations are not keeping pace. So, as part of that episode, as you know, our director of community and economic development, excuse me, community housing and community development here in Augusta explained that dynamic. It's relevant to Augusta, it's relevant to Georgia, it's relevant all over the country because if our allocations aren't growing, nobody else's are either. And this means that it's time for you to contact your state representatives, excuse me, your U.S. representatives and your U.S. senators to say, hey, let's put more money into HUD for these types of programs. Sometimes the call to action is local. You know, one day I was interviewing somebody and I said, well, what do you ever want to know about city? Because this is just an average citizen, you know. And he said, you know, I'm concerned about traffic safety because I have seen some intersections with near misses. I mean, what can we do? Doesn't there need to be a street light or a stop sign at XYZ, a traffic light or a stop sign at XYZ? And I told him, hey, this is who you call to make sure that they do a traffic study to see if they can put something in place. So that's the genesis of local matters. Sometimes in the example, like with housing and community development, it kind of stretches across all levels of government. Yeah, the money is spent here locally, but the money comes from the feds. So the feds need to be working hand in hand to meet the needs of folks at the local level. It also means that those local commissioners or city council people, county commissioners, et cetera, that we have elected, they need to be in the face of the folks at the federal level saying, hey, you need to send us more money because we've got a waiting list of seniors in our community who need their roofs fixed and need new windows in their houses.
Let
So
me
that's
let me
where it came.
talk to you about this. I love that. So I'm a county commissioner here in LA County. One of the biggest issues I have, and I'm in marketing and PR,
Mhm.
but one of the biggest issues is getting people involved before they are actually complaining about something. Getting them involved to get their input before decisions are made. But it seems the trend is decisions get made and they don't like them, and then they come out
Yeah, right.
and storm the
Absolutely.
Capitol.
Exactly. There is, the way I put it is things will happen and then they'll look up and go, well, what happened? Well, how did that happen? Well, who decided that? You know, and I'm sure that's exactly what you're talking about as well in LA. But it's
100%.
universal. It happens everywhere. And the purpose of the podcast is again to get informed about those issues so that you understand them, you're engaged. And when people are running for office and asking for your vote, you can ask them, hey, what are you going to do about X? You know, if there's not a park in your neighborhood, you know, in various cities, there are areas where growth is taking place, but public infrastructure has not kept pace. Roads have not been widened. New parks have not been constructed. New schools need to be built. You know, all of those shifts that take place as an area grows. Uh, Folks need to be aware of those things from the beginning so that when folks are running for office, they start making demands then instead of after the decisions are made.
It's crazy because and I hate sensationalizing things, but sometimes now I'll sensationalize an issue just to get people to pay attention and then break it down, which is goofy. You should be concerned about, I think everybody should have issues that they are concerned about. So you don't have to be concerned about everything, okay? Everything is not your fight. But for the things that do concern you, you should be tapping into them. There's more going on than just the presidential election. So I'm just hoping and really happy to have a show like yours that delves into some of those things. So, do you get guests on your show? If someone wanted to be a guest, if they're in
Oh, so
Georgia, do they have to be in
they
your
don't
county?
they don't have to be. I've had guests from Texas and California. So yeah, they do not have to be here in Augusta. It is called the Local Matters Podcast of Georgia merely because there are a couple other local matters out there that I learned about after I had named my podcast.
Mm,
I found out there's one in Kentucky, Indiana, something like that. So that's why I wanted to make it clear that we're here in Georgia. But yeah, I have had guests. In fact, one of my most interesting shows was when I had a guest from Texas. He is an architect who does a lot of work for municipal governments, and he was talking about adaptive reuse of buildings. We have these old buildings in communities, and they get torn down, and then the historic preservation types are like, well, why'd they tear that down? It's sitting there unused, so people feel like they have no options. Well, you got a lot of options actually. And he talked about some of the things where old churches had been turned into a city hall annex, and blah, blah. So there are any number of different things that you can do if you're creative enough. And that was the point. That again is universal. It's a local government issue many times because local governments are involved in those demolitions, but or they're allowing the private sector to demolish things that maybe shouldn't be. And he also tied that into the environmental benefits, because when you knock a building down and start over with new construction materials and so forth, that's a huge carbon footprint. Whereas if you reuse something that's already there, it's much better from an environmental standpoint. So we've talked about those sorts of considerations, adaptive reuse, building design. I had a former mayor of Compton come in and talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and how that can be used to bring about more equity in terms of the use of resources in local communities. I have had, gosh, I interviewed somebody recently, and gosh, I can't remember now what state she's from, but she's a public health expert who talked about public health, African Americans, and how we can improve the health conditions of African Americans through a more effective use of our public health systems. And that interview is coming up, hasn't been released yet, but it'll be coming up soon. So, no, people from all over. While it's local, you know that everybody has a local, and the issues are very similar in each local area. So, no, there's something for everybody, regardless of where you live.
I love that. And when you are not hosting your radio show, you are consulting. Who are your clients? Who are your people?
You know what? As you were talking earlier, I started to bring that up. You were talking about engagement. I am working on a team that's doing a strategic plan for the city of South Fulton, Georgia. And the city of South Fulton has 110,000 residents or so. We're doing public engagement. We've been out at various events, just talking it up. Each one of the council people has sent out letters to their constituents, asking them to complete the survey. We placed a QR code on the website and all this stuff. And guess what? Out of a city with 110,000 residents, we got about 2,100 people that have completed the survey.
Wow.
And this is the opportunity to voice your opinion.
Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that. So I do, which is to say, I do some strategic planning and public engagement work. I do executive search work for local government organizations. I also do some what I call strategic services. As their organizations, you either need a strategic plan, you need to update a strategic plan, or you've got something that you need to get done that you don't have time to do. I can fill in the blanks with that, given my history in local government. I've been a city manager, assistant city manager, and an assistant county manager. I have led city government, county government, and consolidated governments. So I would put my local government knowledge and experience up against anyone's.
I heard that. Okay.
Yeah, in terms of just the ability to get some things done. So yeah, we're around to help develop leaders, develop your organization, which starts by hiring the right people. And as well, I have a certification in both DISC as well as emotional intelligence. So
Wait, stop right there.
Whole coaching business. And
emotional intelligence. Stop right there.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we lacking in this country right now in emotional intelligence? Where are we missing the mark? For those that are missing the mark.
Yeah, a lot of us are. I think some people just don't understand the value of it. I mean, when we talk about emotional intelligence, just for people who need a little bit more background, we're looking at the ability to solve problems. We're looking at the ability to develop interpersonal skills, work with people. We're looking at decision making ability. And those are the soft skills that are most helpful in a workplace. But quite frankly, I think people have been allowed to get away without them. Like I was talking about earlier about professionalism. I mean, some people have gotten to where they wanted to be in their careers without having very much of it. And I think the same way with emotional intelligence. We will look at some organizations, and I saw somebody say this in an observation, and this was just on a random comment board somewhere, and they said that many times those who are making hiring decisions mistake forcefulness for talent.
Mhm.
Um, we also see that people who are quote unquote charming and good at manipulating others, they just charm the superior slash kiss up to the superior in a way that appeals to their egos. And the superiors then forget about everybody else who has to be subjected to the poor leadership of these individuals.
You ain't said nothing but a word.
So that kind of responded to your question, I think. But yeah, I love going into organizations, administering the EQI. That's the tool that we use, and figuring out just sort of where people are in their emotional awareness. And self-awareness is another one of those things that the instrument measures. So we can look at your self-awareness, your decision making, patience. You threw that out. There are a lot of different angles. I think it's overall about 15 or 16 different factors that you can be evaluated on, and you can figure out where you are now and then develop a plan of action to improve your scores in each one of those areas. And yes, I want to make sure everybody understood that, yeah, you can improve. Um,
Janice, where did you get your love for civic work?
You know what? People ask me that question, and I think it started when I was a little bitty kid. I was raised in a household where my parents read the newspapers and always watched the news. So from that, I just loved figuring out what was going on. And I paid attention to who was on city council, and whether or not I was paying as much attention to the issues, I at least knew who was there and a little bit about what they stood for. And we kept up with what they were doing. And later on, when had just graduated from college, I was working a job with a nonprofit organization, and it was a cool little job, but I knew I wasn't going to do it forever. And the city of Richmond, Virginia, I was living in Richmond at the time, they were going through a search for a city manager. And I watched that search very intently. And I sat there and listened to what they said they were looking for and what the job really consisted of. And I said to myself, I could do that. So I put myself on a course to become a city manager. It kind of combined the civic interest that I had all along with my education, my skill set, and here we are, umpteen years later, still very much involved with local government, now doing consulting with local government organizations, as well as doing a podcast that's focused on local and
I
state.
love it. I absolutely love it. I implore all of you that are listening that haven't already, just consider how much different things would be if your voice was added to the conversation in your local government. And guess what? You'll never know if you don't actually do it. So you can sit on the sidelines all you want, all day long, and complain about things. But until you've actually lent your voice to what's going on in your local government and local politics, all you're going to have is what woulda, shoulda, or coulda
Right.
happened. So
And you will sit there and
sit
complain.
there and complain, girl. Sit there and
And,
complain. Be mad.
and when these people are running for office, figure out who they are. I
Ask
mean,
the questions.
ask the questions, get informed about the issues. Like I was saying, hey, ask them, hey, I'm a senior, I need more, or my mother's a senior, or my uncle is a senior, he needs his house rehab. What are you going to do to make sure the federal government's sending enough money here to get my house rehab, get my uncle or my aunt's or my grandmother's house rehabbed?
Yeah, ask
You know,
real questions.
and
Ask real questions.
what another issue that comes up related to park services, I think I mentioned about growth in areas and in school systems and keeping pace. You've got to understand one of the things I always ask candidates running for office is, what have you done? I mean, I think what they've done in the past is an indicator of what they can do in the future. And if they can't come up with any accomplishments in their past lives, what makes me think they're going to do anything if you elect them? So ask them what they've done. Ask them what they think about the traffic jam that they see at X, and what are y'all doing about it? So you've got to ask them specific questions about specific issues in order to really identify who it is that's going to be best equipped to serve your interest when they get into office.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being here. Let the people know how they can get in touch with you, stay in touch with you, follow your journey and your podcast.
Certainly. Thank you for the opportunity. Some of that stuff is behind me. The Local Matters podcast on SoundCloud, that's my host, but I'm also on Spotify and Apple Podcast. So please follow there. Also have a YouTube channel. The Local Matters podcast of Georgia is the title of that as well. Please subscribe, because I have great ideas about some other things I want to do. But I got to get to 1,000 subscribers in order to do that. So we ask you to please subscribe to the Local Matters podcast of Georgia on YouTube. As well, connect with me on YouTube, on LinkedIn. I love building connections there because, as I said, I do executive search work. So I'm always posting jobs and things like that. So those of you who work in local government can see what I have posted, and as well interact with me. I post episodes of the podcast there so that you can quickly just click on and listen. And also, please, I love doing speaking engagements. You all can tell from this, I love to talk. I just love to talk. So yes, I love doing speaking engagements and workshops and so forth. So please connect with me for any or all of those reasons.
Thank you again for sharing that and empowering our day with your knowledge, with your energy, and yes, your love of speaking, because there are people that do not like speaking. They do not speak well. They do not communicate well, ma'am. And you came on here and dropped some gems and hopefully encourage people to get involved and active in a way that makes their life better, because that's what we are here to do. Give solutions to problems to make things better. So thanks again. You guys go check out her pod, subscribe, help her out on YouTube. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Peace, love, and good vibes. Bye. Hey, thanks for showing up to the podcast where we all know that the best leaders are lifetime learners. When you get a sec, take a moment, leave a comment. What you think about today's episode, and share it with someone that you know could use the gems that were dropped today. Follow and subscribe. You don't want to miss who's coming up next. You never know who could show up here and what they could say. For your professional needs, marketing, PR, communications, and leadership, make sure you follow us on all social media platforms at Sand and Shores, or hit us up at sandandshores.com. Again, thanks so much for showing up. We appreciate you, and we'll see you soon.